Welcome to Close the Gap, where we thoughtfully engage with CEOs and top industry leaders all working to close the female equity gap in the C-suite and boardroom. Christine Gannon, the CEO of Brightworks Consulting, and Dr. Antoinette Farmer-Thompson, a senior leader with Arizona State University, host insightful conversations responsible for moving the needle for female participation in the C-suite.
Well, hello and welcome to another edition of Close the Gap. We are honored and thrilled to have with us today Jonathan Cottrell, who is the Chief Executive Wayfinder of Journeyage. And I'm going to read a little bit about his bio this morning to you. It's very interesting and we can't wait to dive into it more. So he lists himself as a film nerd, an iced americano addict, a cranial nudist, and Jonathan considers it one of his greatest honors to help serve the Journeyage tribe. His primary responsibilities are simple: reinforcing culture, developing people, and cleaning the bathrooms. I don't know about that. I'm sure you have a cleaning crew, right?
Well, we can get into that for sure.
He also never misses a Thursday night date with his wife of 15 years. Nice. He gets super competitive when playing board and card games. He loves serving and supporting the Yes Phoenix entrepreneur community. And before founding Journeyage in April of 2018, Jonathan helped start multiple other startups after growing his leadership and product management chops with influential digital brands like iCrossing and GoDaddy. He won some and lost some in the startup game, but he ultimately considers success to be loving others well. Welcome. We're excited to have you this morning.
Yes,
thank you.
That's fantastic.
I'm honored to be here. Thank you both. Appreciate it.
Well, let's start with your journey into being an entrepreneur. We were told, word on the street is that you started your first business at age 11.
Well, you did hear correctly. My grandmother bought me a book. She had heard this young boy talk about all the businesses that he had started in his neighborhood. And the book was 51 Business Ideas for Kids. And it was actually called Better Than a Lemonade Stand, 51 Business Ideas for Kids. And so I read through that book eagerly, very excited. And there were a number of ideas that stood out to me. But the first one that I really started working on was taking out trashes for my neighbors and then taking them back the next day, the bins. And so my first customer was Mrs. Coinis. It's always good to learn some door-to-door salesmanship early on. And there were a number of ideas, though, as a kid that I was always working on, and I really enjoyed that. So that you can say entrepreneur before you even knew what the word was.
Wonderful. That's fantastic. And I think part of being an entrepreneur, certainly a successful one, and being a successful executive is what they call building the failure resume, if you will, right? So certainly having some experiences to talk about. And part of your journey, I understand, was having a couple of challenges before you were well on your way with Journeyage and GoDaddy.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. Within our family, with my wife and our three kids now, one of our family's values is to take risks. Within Journeyage, one of our values within the culture is don't fear failure. And I think it can become very easy to become perfectionistic about things or really want those wins or successes. But ultimately, more opportunities at bat is going to be what leads to real success and really just iterating as quickly as possible, learning as you go. So that's definitely a staple, I would say, of the path that I've been on. And I've had some startups, a couple that I've sold or exited, and also a couple that didn't pan out as desired. And so I think having both of those in the mix is very important. And it teaches you to also just continue forward. I think resilience is ultimately what's needed in any type of effort but especially within entrepreneurship.
I was reading that the other day. It's a really good point that you bring up in terms of not only resilience, but not being perfectionistic, striving for excellence and taking risks, but perfectionism keeps us in the failure mode. So it's a really good point.
Yeah, very much. I think what the quote in startup land, right, is done is better than perfect. So always be shipping, figuring out, hey, how is it that you iterate, move forward, press forward, and continue to improve upon what you're doing. It's never going to be right the first time. You could think it's amazing. It's still not going to be right. You could do a lot of research even beforehand. A lot of my experience has been in the user experience field. So as much as usability testing as you even do before launching or releasing something, at the end of the day, once you get it out there and you get real data, it's always going to be different than you expect, no matter how much effort you've put in upfront.
Very true. So that is a great segue into Journeyage. Talk to us a little bit about your company, what you do, who your customers are, and your mission to provide pathways for women.
Yeah, I appreciate that very much. Well, Journeyage, we are a learning experience personalization platform. And so we are creating a platform that truly allows training at scale while still keeping that personalized. And there are a number of different avenues for personalization within the platform that we're creating. Our mission as a company based on what we sell is to deliver irreplaceable training. We're doing that for nonprofits, enterprises, and it's been exciting to see the growth over the last year, especially. And we've gone from 2 employees to 16. But as much as that's the mission of the business, what we like to say is that there's always that higher kind of purpose and what is it that you're trying to do. So our purpose as a business is to love and learn. And that's something that we feel, whether we're 9 or 90, it's something that we can be doing, whether we're working on Journeyage or not. That's something that is something that we can pursue. It's a horizon we can pursue every day. And as a cause, though, Simon Sinek, he talks about having a just cause. And we agree with that idea in this infinite pursuit or an infinite game. That's not just about some type of destination or finite goal, but ultimately one that you're infinitely pursuing. And for us, that's co-creating the world's most transformative workplace experiences. And so as we think about transformative and transformation, it's a lot of fun. Ultimately, just as a tribe, as a culture, to really experiment and say, how is it that we do this well? How is it that we create an environment that's radically different? How do we create an environment that is diverse, equitable, inclusive, where people feel like they belong? How is it that we ultimately help people feel like they are becoming better people holistically as they enter into our workplace, not just, from a professional standpoint, but personally, relationally, financially, physical health, mental health, spiritual health, all these different avenues of the person. And so that's a journey we're very much in the middle of. It's by no means saying that we've arrived, but definitely in the female equity and inclusion front for us, that's been a huge focus from the very get-go. And I think that it doesn't matter if you're a startup or not, you have to design for diversity, equity, and inclusion from the get-go. It's not something that can happen by accident, as you both know. Right. It's something you have to be very intentional about. And within the technology field in particular, there's a great amount of disparity, not only then at the in the C-suite, but very much at that level of those who are developing your products, IT, software development, and so on and so forth. So right now we're a 60% female team, and that's something, we have about 20 people right now, and we're looking forward to continuing on that focus. But one of my greatest focuses in that is I really want to build one of the best female team of developers that there's ever been, because I think that is just one area that's been hugely lacking, just statistically speaking. And it is something that ultimately I've seen has a huge positive impact on the end product that you're developing.
I think one of the strengths of people with a technical mindset is process design. And you spoke to it. You talked about designing intentionally and designing from the get-go. And so my question is, obviously, all of the statistics, and we applaud you, we really do. I love your intentionality around finding the best women that are developers. So that being said, you already know that more women are graduating from college than men. And so the systems that are out there, and with your mindset, the systems, what I mean by that are other organizations. How would you redesign? So if I'm an existing company, how would you help them re-engineer or redesign what they've created?
Yeah. Well, it's definitely, going into companies that have already kind of laid that foundation and been and gotten to that place where there is disparity, between the roles, is very difficult. We all know, like, it's easier to build sometimes from scratch, and so, like I said, I think it's within startups, especially when you talk about founders. Well, how are you designing this from day one rather than waiting until day 100 or 1,000 or especially 10,000? How is it that you really create with this in mind? There have been some good case studies of organizations that have been super intentional about this when it comes to filling technical roles in particular with women. Some of the stats that I've seen out there, though, like, women in the tech industry typically earn 29% less than their male counterparts.
Right.
3 out of 4 girls express an interest in computer science, but only 1 in 4 females hold jobs within the IT industry. And so there's just a lot of need to be really intentional, and ultimately there needs to be allyship, right? From those who are in the C-suite and those who are in positions of leadership, and really creating with this in mind from day one. I think for those that are looking to make the change, it's never too late. You just have to then really commit to it. You have to find what are the statistics that really matter to us related to DEI, baseline them wherever it is, even if you're at 0% female, baseline it, and then start making the intentional push to say, hey, we're going to change this. And so, for us, those statistics are public. They're on our website. I think also the more transparency that you place within your DEI statistics in particular, both internally and then externally out to the world, it calls you to account, right? It ultimately makes you far more accountable.
So let's stay with statistics for a moment, because I think, data is always the telling factor, and hopefully fact and truth-based. But given the statistical outcome for women in the C-suite specifically, we currently only have 7.4%, as you know, of CEO seats taken by women in the Fortune 500. So let's talk a little bit about education from your perspective. Given your position, given your company, what types of curriculum or even competencies do you think would help women to really shatter that glass ceiling and even the glass wall, which we're learning about is a new word in our space? But where do you think that women could improve in the education path?
Well, you're talking to someone who is ultimately, I got my associate's degree, but I am a college dropout, didn't get my bachelor's. So I think I'm probably going to come at it from a different perspective than others do. I think oftentimes, especially within education, at least what I'm looking at from a startup standpoint, is it really has so much more to do with your experience. I've actually seen, especially within startups in particular, that education can sometimes, not always, but sometimes be a hindrance within a startup culture. Because I think so much within, especially like an early stage startup, you can talk through all the right things that a company or corporation should do. But really, it's just about moving and pivoting and going as quickly as possible, validating the business, getting as many customers, doing whatever you have to, whatever it takes as a team, as a group of people that are committed to that cause and committed to one another in it. So I believe so much of the education path, sometimes what I've seen is that education can actually hinder progress into the actual role that they're trying to achieve. Really, at the end of the day, it's more experience. It's more proof of just doing the work and pushing through that. For example, someone that we hired as our operations leader, she had come out of both the education space and the nonprofit space. And so we were the first kind of public or private sector organization that she has ever worked for. She has been unbelievable. She has been just, in my mind, honestly, most important hire that we made to really focus on both our people operations, our finance, legal, all these key components to the organization as we're growing, and really also helping us focus on the DEI, the culture, these other aspects as well. Well, what I would say is, she didn't hold back at all just based on education. She said, hey, you know what are the things that I need to learn and apply? And so she just went out and found that education for herself on some of those key things, key problem areas that we were solving for. And I think the less we look to degrees as a whole, I think the more that specifically within the technology space, the more opportunity there will be when we just have a problem solving mindset. So
it's a competency. It's a competency in itself, right? Problem solving, critical thinking, that experience that you talked about. Those are competencies that don't necessarily come with a degree.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say find the experience. Actually, both of the other thing that's rather interesting, I was actually talking about it with one of our latest hires, a front-end developer, and she is from Scotland. Actually, she's moved to California and got her work visa here, got married, and she had a degree, a master's actually in linguistics. And she found this path of technology development, front-end development, and found her way into this. Our other, one of our first front-end developer hires, also female. And similarly, she was doing other things, went to a coding boot camp, and then came into this path. And so seeing more of that, I think there's going to be a broad scale disruption to what education is really required to be successful within the workforce.
I completely agree, being in education. And I love the word disruption. So if you had to consider what success looks like for Journeyage in 5 years, what would that be?
Well, as my bio said, I think it's very important to think through what success looks like personally over the course of your entire life. And so, I believe very much that love never fails, or put another way, that love always succeeds. And I really do think that first and foremost, the thing is, we're talking about co-creating the world's most transformative workplace experience. Are we creating a space that's safe for people to come in, be themselves, belong, and feel like they're bettering as people, right? And so, our priorities, one of the things that we did very early on within the culture is, hey, what are our priorities? Sometimes you have to choose. There's always polarities, right? You ultimately are creating products for customers, for users, and so on and so forth. But it's very simple for us. We have 6 priorities, and priority number 1 is employees, then it's users, then it's customers, then it's community, then it's partners, and then it's shareholders. So employees first, shareholders last. And so I think, what success looks like for us ultimately, at the end of the day, we are a business that's out there to make profit. But if we focus on employees first, creating an amazing space for them, we believe that is what will then lead, that success will be the byproduct of that long term. There's a lot to do. I think in 5 years, I'm hoping that we're in a space where we have hundreds of employees that are experiencing that transformative workplace and something that they've never before felt. And we've had a lot of employees right from day one say they've never, actually even before they're onboarded, say, I've never felt so cared for in the onboarding process, right? Every candidate that applies, we respond to. Personally, there is, hundreds and hundreds of applications for a singular role. And yet we want to make sure that every single person feels cared for in that process. There's nothing worse than throwing your hat in the ring and never hearing back. So these are just some of the things that we're trying to do. And I think, as we think about transformation and what that looks like statistically, how we're measuring that both qualitatively and quantitatively long term, those are the metrics that matter most to me.
Wonderful.
So as you think about your organization, and to tag on to Tony's question in terms of where do you see Journeyage in 5 years, what kind of advice would you, or even education, not talking degree education, but what kind of advice would you give to both your male employees and your female employees in terms of the environment that you're creating? Because if we're seeing these statistics, you shared some startling statistics with us early on in the podcast in terms of women in technology and STEM careers and the major gaps there. And even though there's interest, there's 1 in 4, I believe you said. So how do we shift a culture? What do you instill in your male and female employees so that there's inclusion and equity as the DNA, so that we aren't looking at these statistics?
Well, I think the very first step in that effort, again, is a choice and a focus and an intention. And then what happens after that has to be education and awareness for everybody. So one of the things that we are doing is we do have DEI training that's actually taking place within our own organization. And there are a number of ways that we're employing and deploying that within our own team. One of the things, for example, is we have weekly lunch and learns and as certain types of holidays come up, Women's Equality Month, as an example, or Women's Equality Day, as that came up, we talked about that specifically within our lunch and learn. Or when Juneteenth came up, we were talking about the history of Juneteenth and just some of the racial injustices that have been happening of late. And we talked about that very intentionally. We also have a book club where we're going through, for those who haven't gone through it, Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? A great book that talks a lot about racial equity and provides some good experience and background and insight for those that haven't thought about those subjects historically. And so I just think that these are really important conversations to have. And the more that you're having those openly, rather than them feeling like touchy subjects, and making them something that are those conversations that everyone can be involved in, I think is a huge first step. So those are some of the steps we're taking, not saying we've arrived by any means, but I think the more intentional you are about all of those things and the more conversations you're having internally, the more that's going to be on the mindset of everybody.
Absolutely. Intentionality is the key word.
Yeah, I think that's great insight. I think my last question is, who are you inspired by? Who were you inspired by? We note, of course, that your grandmother gave you your first book, right? Or gave you the book to read. And your commitment to women and to diversity, it's sincere, it's genuine. who inspires you? Where did you really kind of get all of this?
I appreciate that question. For me, I don't want to take such a huge pivot, but when I'm asked the question, I have to answer honestly. I mean, for me, ultimately, in a spiritual sense, I really do look to Jesus. And I think that if you look at what he stood for in his day, just historically, look at the gospel accounts, that he was very much a feminist. And, unfortunately, I think that's been very hijacked by culture and generations. But that's not because of what Jesus stood for. That's because of man's misinterpretations of what he stood for. And so as I look at it, he's very much someone who broke all of the status quo of his day, both in terms of a number of things, both in racial tensions, even at those times, crossing boundaries and barriers that were not to be crossed at that time. And then also one that enfolded, supported, encouraged, promoted women in a way that they were not being promoted at the time. And so for me, that's what I look to. That's who I look to. And I want to see more, especially that are, talking about any type of spiritual matters, religions, the misogynistic or chauvinistic approaches that have often been that have been associated with the church in particular. I think the Christian church too often is something that I very much hope becomes something of the past, because I just don't see it when I look at scripture and I look at who Jesus is.
Fantastic.
Look
we're with you on that.
Look for our new book, Jesus Was a Feminist.
I'm all with that.
there are some good books out there that talk about that, and I very much agree. And look, for me, I'm married to an amazing woman who I would follow anywhere, but also I have a daughter and love her very much. I have nieces, sisters, right? My mom, my aunts, like all these women in my life that are incredible. And why would I want them to have any less opportunity than I have or my sons have? Obviously, I don't want that. So I want to create a world in which there is equity for everyone.
Jonathan, thank you. We are so appreciative of your time this morning and all your insights. Fantastic. Anything you want to leave our listeners with about Journeyage or your platform, where they can find you?
Yeah, I appreciate that. If anyone wants to go to Journeyage, it's spelled Journeyage, AGE.com. And if you want to take a look at our website, you can learn more about our solutions there, but also you can learn more about our culture. If any of this sounds interesting, look at our culture, look at our careers page. It talks more about some of the approach that we've taken. And we're going to be developing a lot more content around this too. It's something that we want to be known by, really the heartbeat of our culture and how it is that we operate. I think it's a really unique and fun experiment. The product, the solutions, what we sell, those are all byproducts after the culture it is that we're creating. And so if you're interested in ever learning more about that, feel free to reach out to us or just drop me an email at JC. That's jc@journeyage.com.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, ladies. I really appreciate what you're doing. Keep the fight.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. You can find more information and connect with Christine or Tony at www.tffei.org or on LinkedIn at the Foundation for Female Equity and Inclusion.